about a recorder that caught nothing. I was sitting under an old tree in Lafayette Pioneer Cemetery, a hilltop cemetery in the Willamette Valley of Oregon. One of those places that has a particular weight to it, the kind you feel in your chest sometimes before you even know why. It was a gray day. There are a lot of gray days there because it's a cemetery on a hilltop in Oregon where it rains a lot. It also gets pretty foggy up there sometimes, and because the cemetery is old and often deserted, it gives it a kind of creepy vibe. I had a digital recorder running. The volume was up loud enough. I could see the levels moving. Something was registering the way it does when you speak or when the wind picks up. I sat under that tree for a while talking, asking the questions you ask in places like that, hoping maybe I'd get a response. But when it came time to play the recording back, nothing. No static, no interference, not even the sound of my own voice. No explanation the equipment could give me. Just absence where something should have been. I've thought about that a lot since. About what it means when the record shows up empty. About the things that leave no trace. Not necessarily because they weren't there, but because we didn't have the right instrument to catch them, or because we couldn't hear the truth of their story. Her name was Anna Eliza Risauer Marple. She is not buried here. Lafayette Cemetery sits above the town of Lafayette. It is, by most accounts, a heavy place. It's the sort of cemetery where local kids go to creep themselves out at night. People report being scratched there by unseen hands. They report EMF spikes around a particular old tree. Though whether that's something worth noting or just the proximity of power lines or something else, I honestly can't tell you. What I can tell you is the place accumulates stories the way certain places do. Not because of what happened there necessarily, but because of what people needed to happen there. The legend goes something like this. A woman in Lafayette, Oregon in the 1800s, accused of witchcraft, hung for her alleged crimes. Before her death, she cursed the town. It will burn 3 times. In actuality, the town has burned twice. Her ghost is seen roaming the cemetery to this day. A woman wrongly accused, wrongly executed, her fury made permanent in the landscape. It's a good story. It has everything a curse legend needs. Has everything a good ghost story needs. An innocent woman, or maybe a woman who was an evil witch, a vengeful death, a prophecy still unfolding over 100 years later. But there's just one problem. It didn't happen that way. Not even close. Anna Marple was not hung. She was not accused of witchcraft, though some of the locals did call her a gypsy, which in the 1880s would have been a pejorative term, as it is today. Gypsy is not a nice word for the Roma people. There was no evidence that she was a gypsy, let alone a witch. But it's clear from the comment that she at least was seen as other by her neighbors. She was not buried in Lafayette Cemetery or even anywhere near Lafayette. She was born in 1842. She died on March 11th, 1916, at the age of 73 or 74, and she's buried 100 miles south of Lafayette in Jacksonville, Oregon, in an unmarked grave. She outlived her son by nearly 30 years. She moved away from Lafayette, collected her late husband's military pension, and lived. The legend needed her to stay, to haunt, to curse, to burn with permanent fury. But the real Anna Marple simply left. But before she left, before we follow her to Jacksonville and the quiet end of her story, we need to talk about what actually happened in Lafayette in 1886. Because the real story is darker than the legend, and more human, and in some ways more troubling. Richard Marple was Anna's son. He was 28 years old, unemployed, widely suspected of theft, and by most accounts, including his own eventually, not a good man. In November of 1886, a local shopkeeper named David Corker was found in his bed. He had been hacked about the head and shoulders with an axe. Corker was deaf. Richard Marple had been overheard in the days before the murder, remarking on how easy it would be to rob a deaf man. The evidence against Richard was circumstantial but serious. Blood on his coat, burglar's tools, no credible alibi, not even from his own wife or mother who lived with them. And Richard, whose mouth seemed constitutionally unable to stay shut, made things considerably worse for himself by insulting the dead man during questioning, displaying open contempt for the jury, and accusing the sheriff of being the real killer backed by a conspiracy of Freemasons. He was convicted. He maintained his innocence until the end. The execution was scheduled for a Saturday by accident, which required additional hearings, which delayed everything by a year, a full year of waiting. On November 11th, 1887, Richard Marple stood on the scaffold in Lafayette and shouted his last words at the crowd below. "Murderer! May God judge you all!" The trapdoor opened. The knot slipped. Instead of a clean death, 18 minutes. 18 minutes of slow strangulation while the crowd watched. And somewhere outside the courtyard walls, his mother was screaming. She called down curses on the town. She said it would burn and never prosper. She screamed the way a mother screams when there's nothing left to do but scream. And the crowd, some of them already uneasy, already wondering if maybe they had just watched an innocent man die, heard those screams and filed them away under a category they had already prepared: witch. Here is where the story gets complicated, and I want to sit with that complication rather than smooth it over, because I'm not interested in easy redemptions. The day after the execution, a cellmate named William Henry Hess came forward with a story Richard had told him the night before his death. A deathbed confession of sorts, sworn to secrecy until after he was gone. According to Hess, the robbery and murder of David Corker had been a family operation. Anna, who had been carrying on a secret affair with Corker, was to drug his drink, unlock the door, and let Richard in to rob the place. The only thing is, when Richard arrived, he found the door still locked, so he broke in through a window and found Corker drugged and sleeping. They took his money, and then they realized Anna's affair with Corker was widely known. She would be the first suspect, especially if the whole family disappeared 2 days later as they'd planned. Richard had a solution. Anna, according to the confession, picked up the axe first. Her blow was, the account said, diffident and girlish. It missed cleanly and woke Corker up. Richard finished it. Jailhouse confessions are notoriously unreliable. Hess may have been angling for early release or attention. Richard may have been doing what he always did, running his mouth to cause trouble, even from the edge of death. We can't really know. Anna actually was indicted as an accomplice, but the charges were dropped for lack of evidence. That is not the same as innocence. It's also not the same as guilt. And here's the question I keep coming back to. Does it matter? Not legally, not in terms of what she may or may have not have done, but in terms of what we did with her afterward. Does it matter whether Anna Marple was innocent? Because the town of Lafayette didn't wait for the answer. They had already decided what she was before the charges were even filed. A gypsy, a witch, a curse made flesh. Not a mother watching her son strangle for 18 minutes. Not a woman who may have made terrible choices and lived with him for 30 more years. Not a woman in an unmarked grave 100 miles away. Not human. Something else. Something the legend could use. Lafayette Cemetery collects women like this. There is the unnamed witch, no name in any record, just the story of a woman dragged from her home, beaten, buried on this hill. No documentation, no grave marker, no date, just the story passed from mouth to mouth, the way stories survive when the records don't. There's Lena Elsie Imus, who died not far from the cemetery and haunts what is now Argyle Winery. Carbolic acid by her own hand. Staff at the winery have reported seeing her apparition. Some say she walks the cemetery too. Another woman absorbed into this hill's particular gravity. And then there's Anna, who is not here, who never was here, whose unmarked grave is 100 miles south in a town that doesn't tell stories about her. The cemetery claimed her anyway. The legend needed a witch. And Anna, with her screaming at the scaffold, her alleged affair, her possible complicity, her refusal to be a sympathetic figure. Anna was available. I think about the recorder under the tree, the levels moving, the silence on the playback. I don't know what Lafayette Cemetery holds, and I don't know if the heaviness is history or geology, or the accumulated weight of human belief pressing into the soil of a hilltop for 150 years. I don't know if what the EMF recorder picks up near that old tree is anything other than power lines. What I know is that the place feels like it's holding something. And what it seems to be holding more than anything is the stories of women the town needed to make into something other than human. Anna Eliza Reisauer Marple left Lafayette after her son's execution. She moved to Jackson County. She collected her late husband's military pension. She lived another 30 years. We don't know what those years were like. We don't know if she carried guilt or grief or both or neither. We don't know what she made of the life she had left after the scaffold and the screaming and the town that had already decided what she was. We know she survived. We know she is buried in an unmarked grave in Jacksonville. We know the legend puts her back in Lafayette because an old woman living quietly on a pension 100 miles away is not useful to a curse or a good ghost story. But she was there. She was real. She had a name, Anna Eliza Reisauer Marple, and a birth year, and a death date, and a grave that few people visit, because everyone is busy visiting the grave she was never in. That's the haunting I keep coming back to. Not the scratches, not the EMF, not the recorder that caught nothing. The haunting of a woman who lived and died, and left no mark on the place that claimed her, only on the place that forgot her. The old stories are always doing two things at once. They're telling us something about the world, about witches and curses, and the women who haunt the places they were wronged. And they're telling us something about ourselves, about what we need those women to be, and why, and what it costs them when we decide. Anna Marple may have been guilty. She may have picked up that axe. She may have watched a man die and felt nothing, or everything, or something in between that doesn't have a clean name. We don't know. What we know is that the town of Lafayette took her grief at her son's execution and called it a curse, took her complexity and called it witchcraft, took her body, her actual buried, unmarked body in Jacksonville and moved it to a hilltop cemetery where it could be useful. That's not a ghost story. That's a very old, very human habit, and it doesn't end in 1887. I'm Martina Rutledge. This is Breath and Bone, where the old stories live.